I try not to take too many pictures of signs. A mentor of mine, as the protests and stuff were ramping up, like he posted on Facebook something to the effect of, know the differences between pictures of signs and pictures with signs in them. There's a tendency when you go out to these things, especially a protest, to you see a clever sign, you're like, take a picture of it. But really, the people are the thing that's most interesting. My quote-unquote wrong way photograph with the cop cars burning and the wrong way sign in it. With that image, I was taking pictures of these burning cop cars because that's something I've never seen. But then, I noticed the sign there and I just started thinking oh, there's an implied question mark here. We're potentially going down a bad path that could spiral even more than it did that day. So I'm not necessarily trying to say, this is exactly what that photo means. I want people to look at that and be like, well, how did we get to here?
Welcome to Binder. I'm Ray McManus. Images, like poetry, are subjective to interpretation. So an image by itself means that multiple people can come to it and receive multiple interpretations. Unfortunately, people have always thought that poetry worked the opposite. There could only be one interpretation, whatever the poet tried to do, and then that's what the English teacher was going to quiz you on, and if you got it wrong, then you didn't get poetry. When in fact, multiple people can read the same poem and pull out multiple interpretations. Which is a lot different than, let's say, with journalism, where you are sort of hopefully embedded in fact. With a newspaper article, you expect to see the who, what, when, where, and how. And then you can walk away with your own opinion based on that fact. Images and poems are presenting, for lack of a better word, opinions. And, there may be fact in those opinions, but they are subject to your interpretation, hopefully by clues that are in the poem or clues that are in the image. And then you're able to walk away from that thinking what you want to think that this image is about, or what it represents, or what this poem is about, or what it represents. And there may be differing ideas and differing opinions, and I think that's great. We should welcome that. That brings more voices to a conversation rather than one person saying, this image is about X and this poem is about Y, and if you don't see where or how, then you just don't get photography. You just don't get poetry. And that's a massive disservice, I think, to the art.
I feel like we've come the closest in my life in this country to being on the precipice of a civil war. And I know I sound like I'm being extreme, but having covered the Syrian war and digging deep into the Lebanese civil war because of my family ancestry there, and learning my family stories in that war, this is the beginning of how that starts. It's this sort of extreme dehumanization of those people on that side are 100% the enemy, and we cannot cede any ground to them. Once you're in that kind of situation, that's when we should all be kind of scared. But when I see these people interacting face to face on the ground at the State House, there were all these interesting conversations happening that you wouldn't see online. The dehumanization is being wiped away. My name is Thomas Hammond. I'm a freelance photographer here in Columbia, South Carolina. Been doing that for the past 10 years, mostly for the free times. And yeah, that's pretty much what I do is I just figure out how I can get people to pay me to do photography.
That's awesome.
I hope that's fine.
That's awesome. Well, let me ask you, Thomas, why photography?
Well, I started out as a music major. And I graduated from the University of South Carolina with a bachelor's degree in music education, thinking I was going to become a band director. Got into a classroom and very quickly figured out that I wasn't going to be able to handle that. But the whole time I had been taking pictures. My dad started out as a photographer in the Navy. He fought the Cold War, hunted down Russian submarines, took pictures of them, went back to Maryland and developed the film in a dark room. And, we ended up having cameras all over the house through my childhood. And I just would pick them up and tinker with them. Even before I was really taking pictures with them, I was just messing with the buttons and opening up the film back and figuring out how all that stuff worked. And and then eventually just started shooting rolls of film. And, but I never thought of it as anything more than a hobby. So I just kind of stumbled through a lot of other things. And then eventually I was taking pictures of drunk people at the Wig and posting them on Facebook. And people were like, oh, I was really drunk that night and you made me look really good. And that got the attention of other photographers in the free times. And then I just kind of went down the rabbit hole from there.
Well, as one who also tried to capture drunks at the Wig, I can totally relate to how a career trajectory can really sort of spawn from that experience. But, one of the things that really captivates me about your work, there is a lot going on in a lot of those photographs, right? There's a lot going on in the foreground, the background, and yet you're able to focus on that singularity, that one particular moment. I don't know how you do it, honestly. I mean, because as one who has undiagnosed adult ADHD for, pretty much my whole life, to be able to focus on that particular thing to take. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, do you find the thing and want to grab, or are you just out there just trying to grab as much as you can and hoping something comes out of that?
Honestly, I think it's a little bit of both of those things. Like, the day, May 30th, 2020, that was our riot day. I mean, there are a lot of other cities that had worse riots, and, Portland and Minneapolis, things were going on for weeks and months, and ours was kind of focused down to 2 days, basically. From the moment we all gathered in front of the City Hall, marched to the Capitol, there's a big rally at the Capitol, and then people decided to go to the police station, and then things started to really spiral out of control. I mean, that was 10 hours long from shot one to the last shot. That day, for me, it was just a lot of unknowns. I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know if there was going to be death and injury, or if it was just going to be tense, or really what was going to happen. So a lot of it really is just shoot as much as you can. Don't think too much. Just kind of work on impulse. I must have shot 1,000 frames that day. And then, when you get home and you get in front of the computer, you can start pouring through images. I don't think I captured even the totality of what happened that day, because there were interactions that seemed very constructive. There were interactions that were very tense. There was violent interactions. There was just the whole gamut of things. And if I could go back and do it again, I would absolutely try harder to make sure that I'm capturing that totality. Because the other thing too is you end up sort of getting hyper focused on things that are violent. I mean, I think this is something that the media does a lot, where it's you go for the sensational shot. That's the thing that's exciting. But how do you tell a story of this thing was going on for 10 hours? And there was a lot of it where it was actually kind of boring, where it was really hot and you're uncomfortable and you're like, man, I just want to go home. And then there were cop cars on fire. And then there's a cop driving a car through a crowd of people. Then there's the mayor walking around, just looking terrified, because I'm sure he had no idea what this was going to turn into. I tried not to spend too much time looking in the camera, sort of distracted driving. As soon as you look down, you're missing all this stuff that's going on. And I mean, I even kind of did that to a fault, where my smarter colleagues, Sean and Crush, took breaks. They went home and hydrated and ate food and stuff like that. And I'm sitting out there the entire time, dehydrated, hungry, about to fall over. Because if I turn around, if I blink, I'll miss something.
Right.
But you can't do that. And that's another reason why newspapers, wire services, stuff like that, they need lots of photographers. And untrained writers with cell phone cameras just aren't going to cut it. You need people who are trained, who know how to operate in those environments and see what the important shots are and stuff. And again, from the day of the riot, Tracy Glantz, photographer for the state newspaper, she got a shot, just nailed the shot of a cop with his knee on the neck of a person they were arresting. And none of the rest of us were there. She knew exactly where to be, and she got that shot. Writers wouldn't have gotten that shot. Everybody else missed that shot. And that was important to sort of telling the story of that day of we've got a police force that I think in the spectrum of, good to bad in this country is probably right in the middle. Not the worst, but not the best. And, and it's important that people know that. Yeah, you probably know a bunch of police officers who are great, and then one of them's still going to put a knee on somebody's neck while he's arresting them and potentially put their life in danger over violating a curfew.
Right.
Which most of those people got arrested for violating a curfew order.
Right.
They didn't get the people who were vandalizing stuff until later.
You know, that image that you're referring to with the knee on the neck, I mean, I don't think anyone could ever look at that image now. It doesn't matter if it happened that day or if it happens tomorrow, could ever look at that image and not think back to George Floyd.
Especially after George Floyd.
Right. I mean,
like I didn't even know that was a technique that cops used.
Yeah, I didn't either.
You know, because I live in the sheltered world of, 30-something white dudes.
Yeah.
You know, I have no idea what that is even like. I mean, even, in very sketchy scenarios where like I've been overseas doing reporting, illegally crossed a border from Turkey into Syria to trying to chase some stories about, Syrian rebels and refugees and stuff like that. And then coming back across the border, we get stopped by these Turkish border guards. We should be arrested and deported and all this kind of stuff. But the guy, it was just like this 18-year-old kid who wanted to be anywhere but there. I mean, this is what I was hearing through our translator, but he was basically just kind of like, hey man, like my sergeant is up the hill in that tower over there, and if I let y'all cross, I'm going to get in a lot of trouble. So if y'all could just chill for a little while, then you can come on through. And I'm just sitting there, it's just, my mind is being blown. Like, people get shot regularly trying to cross this border. Our own border with Mexico, people are dying, people are being thrown in detention camps and stuff like that. And meanwhile, I'm just sitting here being asked to politely wait.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, as one who has had a knee in my back from a police officer, never once thought I was going to die, you know, I mean, or being pulled over. I never thought this is it, That is a privilege that has existed in this country. And until we are absolutely confronted with images that show us the opposite and what the world is like or what this country is like, for other Americans that just simply aren't white, we can't reconcile with that. And so for that, man, Thomas, the job that you guys are doing far transcends, a show here at the museum or the big shot that maybe lands on the front page of paper somewhere. You are truly recording humanity in a way that we need to see, we need to recognize, and we need to reconcile with the differences that are pretty stark.
It's always been very interesting to me when I share these images, especially on Facebook or Instagram, and just seeing like, what are people's responses? And I've really tried hard to make sure that my social media community is a diverse group of viewpoints. Because I really do think we're going down a bad path if we're all like, I'm shutting all this worldview out. I mean, my rule is like, if you're not a jerk to me, then I'm not going to be a jerk to you, that kind of thing. Like, I'll hear you out. Even, it doesn't matter how offensive whatever the thing is you're saying, like, or how much I may disagree with it. Like, at the end of the day, like, I know I don't know everything. I don't know everything about your life. I don't know what you've been through. That's what I love about journalism, though, is you ask people questions and you dig into their life and it illuminates everything. I feel less scared about the world. Once I learn, like, okay, why did you get to a point where you're voting for Donald Trump, a person that I personally find to be very despicable? And then I start to learn things about these people and it's like, okay, I still don't agree with what you did, but I can see how that road led to here. And now it's me and the rest of society and your job. Like, everybody, we're all in this together. We all have different ideas of what is terrible and what is good. And just like, how do you sort through that?
Leaving with the questions seem to lead to understanding, and understanding can lead to empathy. It doesn't mean that questions always lead to one answer or the right answer or an answer you even are comfortable with.
Right.
But if you're left with at least something you can understand, even if it's just understanding why.
Right.
You can at least empathize, even if you disagree.
The ultimate thing, like you just said, is empathy. If people are going to walk away from these images with any kind of thing that I want them to walk away with, it's a greater sense of empathy for other people.
Thomas's work is part of Hindsight 2020, on view through October 24th. You can see more of his work at thomashammondphoto.com. Next.
Poetry is almost like this pure feeling. In order for me to create that, I have to be very raw and very honest.
Sunshine Dempsey, when we return.
Hey y'all, producer Drew here to fill up your social calendar for September with some exciting CMA programming. On September 8th and the 14th, take a tour and get a new perspective on Amanda McCover's Bright Little Day Stars with volunteer coordinator and installation assistant Jackie Palmieri. On September 22nd, grab a cocktail and a seat for a panel discussion featuring Carol Suvian, executive producer and director of the Peabody Award-winning and Emmy-nominated PBS series, Craft in America. On September 25th, get your dancing shoes ready for Shea Alexander Presents Live on Boyd Plaza with popular Charlotte-based outfit Reggie Graves and Jazz Theory. You can find out more about these and all of our upcoming programs and events on our website, www.columbiamuseum.org. And now, back to the show.
Memory, history, dysphagia. What is the difference between witness and document? We live in a world of core and mantle. The body defines race, gender, being, capitalized. This is disparity of presence. History, law, memory. This is about seeing you, about the reparations of seeing you whole. Acknowledging your pain at being told that you aren't. Acknowledging your pain at being told that anger is violence and criminal, so that what you feel is already a transgression, so that being you becomes a transgression. This child will grow strong in an understanding of silence. He will grow wise in the knowledge that history is a filter and it can block the light. It erases when it preserves. It creates a void, a silence, and I want to hear your words now, not mine. I want to hear your words, not mine. I'm Sunshine Dempsey. I'm a poet and I teach for the dual enrollment program for USC Sumter. I'm an English instructor and I'll be teaching a poetry course at USC Columbia this term as well.
Well, it's always great to be able to see you, Sunshine, and I don't think we've ever had a short conversation.
No.
In the times that we've known each other. You not only have, I think, a gift of having a very succinct voice, but the way you're able to really communicate to a subject through your speaker in your poems. Can you talk a little bit about, your role as a poet and entering into writing about photographs that, obviously doesn't have a voice to it. And so poets will maybe want to think about giving voice to what is in the photograph, but it felt like you're taking a little bit of a different tone of speaking directly to the subjects in the photographs. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think it was really important for me to figure out what my role as an ally was in this process. It's really hard as a poet to not, speak for a community that is trying to speak for themselves. And I think that perhaps for me, the greatest act of advocacy that I can do is to just shut up and listen and try and figure out what they're saying and not speak for them. I am in my work and just in life trying to learn how to just give space and shut up and listen and learn, because I think we need to learn a whole new narrative and in a way, a whole new language that we really only learned half of.
So true. I think for the longest time, we have assumed that the way we use language is the only way to use language. And, and so much of that has been a patriarchal kind of construction, right? Like you said, if you can't speak, I will speak for you. And often I think folks may end up shouting over the very voice that really people need to hear. I've always found it to be absolutely exciting to uncover those voices.
Oh, absolutely.
And let those voices speak, right? Because you're right. If we shut up, we learn. And that's really, I think, for folks who might be hungry about education, that's such an important and necessary factor that one has to take in place in order to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you find yourself doing a lot of in your poetry? Is that something that you found specifically in this particular thing? I mean, because, you know, a lot of what we're looking at in these photographs deal with race, right?
Mm-hmm.
But there's the LGBTQ community.
Sure.
And then, of course, we see that in terms of gender,
Right.
a lot. Is this something that a project or something that you've always kind of had in mind as a poet?
Oh, absolutely. I am really interested in language as a tool of communication, but specifically those places where it fails to sort of represent an experience. And one of those places is gender, or, you know, I mean, our language is incredibly gendered. And as a person who is a member of the LGBTQ community, I'm just kind of going along being me. But then I sometimes realize that the language that I've been taught is not always expressive of my experience. So I play around a lot with that idea of that sort of that edge of what we can do with language. But for that, I feel like I have sort of a right to speak to that experience because that's me. And when it comes to issues with race, I am so careful with the language because I really don't want to overstep, you know, and sort of transpose my experience, which is nothing like theirs. I mean, I'm not taught the same lessons growing up about interactions with, you know, authority and the police and this power structures and systems that sort of guide things. So this was a very difficult, actually, project. As far as getting outside of my own experience, but not trying to force my voice into something that I don't know about.
Right. Which is the balancing act as a poet. I hate to use the word struggle because, you know, it is something that we yearn to balance. But you're right. Trying to keep our own experiences from clouding what we're trying to write about or overshadowing the experiences that really need to come through. Were there particular times as you were working on these poems that, you know, you just felt like, you know, you're just getting your ass kicked, you know, trying to write this and you just can't land it? Or...
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think that I had shut down actually through 2020, to be honest. Like I just sort of like couldn't approach poetry at all because I knew that there was that rawness there and I needed to get stuff done to survive like we all were.
Right.
So hindsight on 2020, literally, I realized that I'm sort of opening myself up to feeling that again. So yeah, it kicked my ass. It definitely did.
Well, yeah, let's talk about that experience in 2020 because I think that's something that people may take for granted and thinking, you know, we can, as poets, we write every day or we write on demand or we're inspired by everything. And so we write about everything and those things may happen. But 2020 was a tough year. We need the ability to go inside ourselves, and to process, and to write about that. And when it's raw, you do that. And all you do is you just keep like almost, I don't know if you had this experience, but you just feel like you just keep chipping at the same nerve, you know, and there's no distance that, you know, for you to be able to create because everything just keeps happening, right? It just kept piling and piling and piling. Do you find that now after having processed a lot of that stuff over the past year that it's a little easier now to kind of come back to it?
I think I'm in the process of processing right now. Right. Honestly, I remember seeing the Black Lives Matter protests and I just thought this is so important and so brave to go out there and do that, like gather in a group, which they were saying, you know, you don't do this. But I was like, this is so important for them to do that. And I felt a lot of shame because I didn't go. And, you know, that was because I had concern for my partner and for myself. I felt a lot of shame again going through these photos and saying like, maybe there was something I could have done. And now I'm sort of at the point where like maybe going through these feelings and processing this and then putting it to poetry, which is for whatever reason, that's what I do. And so maybe that's my role in this. But no, I think I'm going to be processing what happened for a long time. It's really easy for me to make jokes and compartmentalize and, you know.
Sure. So American.
And especially if you're a teacher, you kind of like want to play things down so your students don't freak out, Right. So, I think I do that in life as well.
Doesn't take much for our students to freak out. But in that, Sunshine, I think you came back to the very thing that has been pretty difficult in this. Where's the line between shut up and listen versus, your silence makes you an active agent, right?
Right.
Especially in thinking about that in race as white Americans, that, yes, we need to be quiet. We need to take a step back and listen to what people are saying. But it's also been our silence, the allies' silence, that has allowed for a lot of this stuff to continue. How do we stay just to the left or just to the right of that line where our silence isn't an implication?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm still figuring out new ways to do it. One of the things that I'm doing is trying to integrate different, pieces into the literature courses that I teach, different voices. I talk about different Englishes when I go in and I say, hey, there's not just one standard American English. There's like a lot of different Englishes. I am trying to sort of explore that and present those different narratives for them in a way that they're not immediately going to resist, because I think it's uncomfortable when you learn these things for the first time. Maybe it can be mind blowing at the very least, but I think you're taught all of these things throughout your school career. And then you kind of have someone say, hey, there's another story here. There's another narrative. There's another American history. There's another way to be.
At the end of the interview, Sunshine told me that she's working on a book for the past 20 years. Let's all cross our fingers that we'll be able to have a little sunshine on our bookshelves sometime soon. When I first agreed to do these podcasts, I only thought this would be a wonderful way to get people to come to see the images and a wonderful way to hear our poets. I guess in a way, I thought that this was just going to be a really fancy marketing tool. And what I found to be the complete opposite of that, it was a true learning experience. To be able to talk to poets and to talk to photographers, one is comfortable being behind a camera, and the other is comfortable being behind a pen. They're not always comfortable or not always have the opportunity to be able to talk about what goes into their work, what they do with their work. And there were things that perhaps our listeners may have made assumptions about. I know there were things I made assumptions about of why artists do certain things. I would listen to them talk. Either those were turned over on their heads or they were completely affirmed. And so learning about that was really cool. But the part that probably has blown me away in this entire experience has really been about learning how much we are so very similar. We may have different approaches into how we deal with things, but we're all similar in the fact that we have in us a human innate desire to deal with things, to make sense of things, to do the work it takes. And that to me was by far the most encouraging thing I could have heard. When we've gone through a year and a half of this feeling of complete distance and really in some aspects seeing the absolute worst of us getting all of the attention, we forget that there's more similarities than there are differences. And to hear that other people feel that there is a necessary work as an artist that has to be done, like we're compelled to do it. It was encouraging to know that I'm not a complete freak, that I'm not always, thinking on this level and why am I the only one thinking on this level? No, come to find out, no, I'm not the only one thinking like this. And nor are our photographers and poets, if they had the conversation with you, the listener, they would find that they are not the only ones that are feeling this way. And so I hope that the takeaway from all of this, that anyone who's been listening this season has gotten to know a little bit about our photographers and our poets, have gotten to know a little bit about the work that they actually put into presenting to us the world that we live in, and appreciate it. Because without them, what would we know? Who would we be? And where would we be going? You've been listening to Binder, a production of Columbia Museum of Art. Today's episode was hosted by me, Ray McManus, produced and edited by Drew Barron.
Somebody was listening to it and they were like, why does Ray always say photographer?
With special assistance from Joel Ryan Cook. For more information about Binder, CMA exhibitions, and programs, please visit our website at www.columbiamuseum.org.